never ceases to amuse me when you keep bringing up the Long Island iced tea as your cocktail of choice. It is literally the strongest cocktail you can get on any menu, isn't it? Welcome to Cloud Realities, a conversation show exploring the practical and exciting alternate realities unleashed through cloud-driven transformation. I'm Dave Chapman.
I'm Sjoukje and Rob.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And we are back with the first episode of Season 3. Summer seemed to whiz by and in a blur of grey skies here in the UK, but I speak somewhere around mid-September and it's absolutely overwhelmingly hot. So having sat all summer...
Too hot.
Just absolutely mental. This all summer, it's been like drizzly and borderline cold, and it was when I was in a tent in Cornwall for 2 weeks. Where was this hot weather then, Rob Kernahan? That's the question I've got.
It wasn't following you, that was for sure. Yeah.
No. Over the summer period, Sjoukje, who missed on some of the live shows that we did as specials over the summer, has been moving house. So Sjoukje, we've missed you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about the house move then.
It was quite a project. Yeah. It was only 4 kilometers away, but it was quite a project. Yeah.
It doesn't matter how you move house, how far. It's like an incredible thing. If you've lived in a house for more than about 5 years, the amount of crap you accumulate and then you find random stuff on the way, it's just horrible.
Yeah, it is. It is really horrible. Yeah. Yeah, I got surprised on each level of the house. Yeah.
What was your favorite thing that you found, like buried at the back of somewhere that you even forgot you'd had? And you're like, oh, I remember I was excited about this at one point.
Oh, that's a very good question. There were not very much exciting things. I did find an old crib somewhere in the corner of the attic. And we actually moved that as well because it has some emotional...
So you couldn't let go of it?
No.
Just take everything with it. Even though you know you don't need it or you'd buy a new one or whatever, you stay, well, just in case. Yeah, it's the just in case mentality. Stick it in a box, it'll be fine.
I'll just take this out of the corner of the attic that we haven't looked at for 20 years and I'll go and put it in another corner of a
new corner.
And Rob, what was your highlights over the summer? Did you have fun?
Well, we took the family karting into theme parks and things like that. So
you said that was the thing you were looking at. What was the big ride that you enjoyed most?
Smiler at Alton Towers, 16 loops in short succession, the most loopy roller coaster in the world, still officially. And you come off it and you're a bit wibbly wobbly.
Is it smooth? So I like the ones that are doing all of that, but they're smooth. But the ones that are doing that, maybe they're a bit older. And they just throw you around the whole place?
It's pretty smooth, but it's 16 loops in just a couple of minutes, and there's 2 stages, so it's unrelenting, shall we say. You've been on it when you get off. There's no doubt of what you've just been through. And then we went up to see the fjords, and a massive storm ripped through Norway at the same time, so that was a bit bumpy on the way up.
Yeah, that's it. You don't want to be on a boat in a situation like that.
I actually went up to apparently one of the most beautiful places in the world, with the best view in Norway, and all I saw was cloud.
I've seen a picture of you standing in front of that view. It looks like you could be standing, at the bus stop just down the road from my house.
You wouldn't know I could have been at a bus stop. But anyway, them's the breaks, but it was relaxing and restful.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We are kicking off Season 3, so we have got a lot of good stuff to come between now and Christmas. But let's get going with something a little bit new. So Rob and I talk regularly, and there's generally something that's confusing him about the world. He is that type of chap. And sometimes he might even have a point. So what we thought we'd do each week is just have a look at what's confusing Rob. So Rob, what's confusing you this week?
Well, this week, David, I'm mainly confused by terms and conditions and why there isn't more outrage in the world about what's going on. So you've got video platform providers, you've got browsers, you've got social media platforms, and they're releasing terms and conditions that are, quite frankly, a massive encroachment on personal data.
So it's not what's in the terms and conditions. I've read them and now I am baffled by them. It's more all the stuff that's getting snuck into them that actually is very compromising from a data security point of view, but we just let it go.
Yeah, and people just clicking accept. In fact, browsers are updating themselves and resetting the terms and conditions switches that you switch off not to share your data and stuff. And it's being reported on. The tech press is talking about it, and I can't believe there isn't more outrage in society. People are just clicking accept. And the bit I don't get is why? It's like we've gone over a hump and nobody cares about the personal data anymore. Back in the day, in the very early days of the internet, people would be outraged by this. There'd be so much, I'm not doing that. And now it's just accept. People have got bored of the scrolling.
You're just overwhelmed by it. I mean, I think a lot of the downside of things like the regulation that came in the EU that meant that you had to accept all cookie use and such like for every single website you pretty much go to.
We're fatigued.
It means you're clicking accept all like 20 times a day, aren't you?
Yeah, you don't even have the time to read all those terms and conditions, right?
No, right.
They're using it for AI algorithms and all sorts of stuff, and it's been quite scary. So I think, going back to the social reset, I think there'll be an event around terms and conditions that'll be just the bridge too far for many, but still can't believe we've allowed it to go this far.
Well, let's keep track on that, Rob, and we'll hear next week what's confusing you then. So this week on the show, though, we're going to be talking about change management. Not just good program management, but how do you lead change when what you have in front of you is exceptionally daunting? And the reason we want to look at this at the opening show is we think that we've gone through a period of, ever-increasing change and ever-accelerating change. And when you look ahead from where we are today, and we talked about this a lot last season, we have got, obviously, AI is now the big conversation of the moment. You have other technologies like quantum coming along very shortly, and it's going to lead to a series of accelerated transformations on the back of already complex transformations like cloud transformation and digital transformation and many other different types of transformation. So how on earth do you hold yourself together when you're dealing with change that daunting on a week-by-week basis? And I'm delighted to say that joining us this week to talk about that is Erwin Visser, General Manager for Cloud Service Provider Business in Microsoft Americas, but also someone who's been on a very special adventure recently, and that adventure might frame for us a little bit this conversation. So Erwin, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to just introduce yourself and say hello?
Yes, thank you. Great to have me on this podcast. As you mentioned, my name is Erwin Visser, and I work for Microsoft in Americas, and I lead the cloud service provider business for the Americas region. In my accent, you can hear that I'm not originally American. I'm from Amsterdam, but moved 15 years ago to the worldwide Microsoft organization. And what was supposed to be a 3-year experience turned out to be a 15-year thing at this moment.
So Erwin, paint a picture for us. So you are approaching the mountain for the first time and you've walked up to base camp. Just paint for us what that looks like and what was going through your mind as you were approaching such a big challenge.
Yeah, Dave, that's a really good question. And it is when you see Mount Everest for the first time, you feel excited. Because it's the first time that you really see the mountain at that size, and something you have been visualizing and dreaming of for weeks and months and maybe years. But second is that you also have this feeling of being overwhelmed. The summit of Everest is like it's peaking above any other mountain around it, and when I saw it for the first time, you could see the jet stream just like hitting that summit. And it's so you kind of like feel also like, how do I ever get there? And how do humans ever get there? And it's this overwhelming feeling of understanding the challenge that you signed up against.
Let's take how you actually then pushed into it in chunks. So clearly the first chunk was to actually get to base camp and get yourself established. I'm sure in advance you spent a lot of time planning and thinking about it, but it must have felt different in the in the moment when you're actually there. So what was that first night at base camp like? Sorting through your thoughts, the emotional reaction you're having to the new big challenge. What was that first night like?
The first night was still, I think, a lot of like positive anticipation about everything that is coming, and to break down a Mount Everest expedition. I think about it in three different chapters or parts. And so the first part is the hike up to base camp. And so you first of all fly to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, and then 2 days later you fly into Lukla, which is the start of the Khumbu Valley. And from Lukla, it's approximately 10, 12 days, dependent on your pace, up to base camp.
That alone is mad. Like a 12-day hike in any other circumstances is a fairly substantial undertaking. It's right, isn't it?
Yeah. It's and you have trained a lot to get there. So I was not too concerned about my physical fitness getting up to base camp. Although people do get sick and sometimes people need to be helicoptered out, I felt really, really good up to base camp, and it felt a little bit like a vacation. You walk up from tea house to tea house. You don't sleep in tents yet, and you still have like a normal restroom, and one out of three tea houses even had a shower. So you feel like you're doing a bit of a vacation trip, like a trek up to base camp, and you enjoy the environment and the culture. When you hit base camp, that's the first time I really felt the altitude. Because base camp is at 17,000 feet or 5,500 meters. And if you look around the world, there is no location on the planet where people live at that altitude. And there is a really good reason for it, because you have 50% of the oxygen. So you don't feel really great mentally and physically when you are in base camp. And in base camp, you start with with getting yourself really acclimatized for the Everest summit, and that's a 4-week process approximately, where you do acclimatization hikes, and you also do 2 rotations. In total, there are 3 rotations, or at least our team did 3 rotations. And so your first rotation is to Camp 2, the second rotation is to Camp 3, and then you should be acclimatized and totally prepared for the final summit rotation up to Camp 4, ideally the summit, and then going back to base camp. So that's how I kind of think about the 3 parts. And the first part was the trek, beautiful environment, and a lot of anticipation of what is coming.
Right. And in terms of what's coming then, when you're actually looking at the challenge ahead of you and preparing for it in the way you've described, tell us a little bit about your team. What team did you have around you at the beginning of the journey? What kind of conversation were you having with the team? How aligned were you on the journey?
We started with 8 climbers. And later, a few others came in, and some people had a different schedule. But you get pretty close to the 8 climbers, because you spend a lot of time together as well at night in the tea houses and dinners, as well as in the trek. So you get to really know each other very well. One of the interesting aspects of climbing in general, but especially Everest, is that people lose their filters, and people get really to the core of their character. There's if you're exhausted, tired, thirsty, and you're cold, there's not a lot of things that you can filter out of your personality. You become pretty pure, and so so you really get to know people very well.
You also have a naturally aligning North Star or mission, don't you? It's very, very clear what you guys want to achieve together.
Yeah, you're very focused. And so 2 of the climbers that we started with had done Everest before, and they both didn't make it at the end. And so they want to try it for the second time. One tried it for the third time. And so you really want to start understanding like what their experience was, but you also want to learn from them in like what what make them not succeed. So because you want to not fall in the same trap, ideally.
And that must be really important and almost calming in a way. If you meet somebody who's done it before and they tell you about how they achieved it, I suppose you can check and balance against your preparation and everything. I mean, there's so many factors in such an undertaking. But was that calming to meet people who'd done it before who were going with you again? Did that have any, or was it still didn't really dent the nerves of what you're about to undertake?
Yeah, I think that it's you could say it's calming. I do think when you start an adventure like Everest, you have to build the self-trust that you don't, and your positive thinking, that you don't get influenced by any external factors easily. Because you go through like very sketchy terrain. There are a lot of moments where you go to a high risk environment, like business can be in high risk environment, but the worst thing that can happen is you make a mistake and you could be fired. And in Everest, a mistake could be your death. And so you have to really build some kind of wall around your and positive thinking, that you don't get influenced easily by other people. You want to understand their learnings, so you can adjust your strategy or approach. But you have to have a high level of self-trust to start something like this.
So you've set off then on the journey. You're now heading up the mountain. So you're at base camp, and then you're at camp 1, camp 2. Clearly things going well. So give us a sense of what those initial journeys like. And where I want to get to really here is, what happens when pressure starts to exert itself? Clearly, you're doing this from a point of view of wanting to enjoy the journey, but actually, you need to summit. You've only got a certain amount of time once you're on the mountain, so you've got a time pressure that's acting on you almost straight away, like right from the outset. So, tell us a little bit about the journey, but also tell us about how you're managing against the time pressure.
Yeah, there's so much to share on this point. It was interesting for me, especially in retrospect, that I was positive, and things. You do a few days of training in base camp, and I felt really good about it. But then the first time we went through the famous Khumbu icefall, and to get from base camp to camp 1, you have to cross the Khumbu icefall, and it's you have probably seen pictures, but that is where the Khumbu icefall is a river of ice. It moves around 3 feet a day. There are a special group of Sherpas that create a route through it, which is probably one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. And so they call them the icefall doctors. So they create a route for climbers through the icefall, and they update that on a regular basis because the ice is moving. It's the Khumbu icefall is probably one of the most risky parts of climbing Everest, and I had some kind of feeling that I was kind of excited to go through it, but that was a complete wrong assessment because it was hard. It was the first time. I think it took me 12 to 14 hours. I forget the exact time, and I was really, when I arrived in camp 1, I was totally exhausted, and that was for me was a wake up moment that, hey, this is going to be really, really hard.
And in that pressure situation, what are you doing to self-manage? So there's a couple of dynamics going on, I suspect. The first is, how is the team coping in a pressure situation that is frankly slightly dicier than you expected it to be? And then how are you self-managing in that situation to, I guess, stay positive and stay focused on the summiting element of it? But what's going on in there?
Yeah, I think that, so on that first time, it was a grind. And I made mistakes because I realized that I had to manage my own hydration better. I had to manage my own food situation better. I was, I think, one of the slowest in that day. And so you can imagine that you're in a situation with 10 other climbers. And so, there's no competition to be the first in camp 1, but you're still measuring yourself against other climbers.
Sure.
And so seeing myself struggle that day, being maybe one of the slowest, really was like a reset moment for me. During the day, One of the things I learned through climbing is that you really have to set short goals for yourself. And it's not just for the whole expedition, but it's even on a 1 day thing, like going through the Kumba Icefall. Yeah, you cannot, if you just realize where you have to go to that day, it is overwhelming. It feels like it's far. And so what you have to do is think about, like, I'm going to take a quick rest and a sip of drink in 45 minutes from now. And I'm just going to keep going till in the next 45 minutes. And you don't try to think too much about what's going to happen after that 45 minutes and that sip of drink and that quick rest. You really focus on getting to that rest point. And then you get through your rest point and you create like another quick goal in your mind that is more reachable, right? Like maybe an hour away or an hour and a half away. Could be like a hill, could be a point in the distance, or maybe it's against a time slot. But you want to set for yourself these smaller goals, because these smaller goals give you it gives you like a shot of dopamine, so you feel really good about yourself when you hit that destination, and it gets your mind out of what you have to do that whole day.
And so is that how you are managing your mental resilience throughout all of this, which is you think about it very explicitly, you create a framework for yourself, and even through the more difficult and testing periods, you're constantly checking yourself against various different things. So rather than I'm laboriously crawling through this ice field with a vertical chasm of ice on either side of me and trying to look right to the top of the mountain and think, God, that looks like a long way.
Yeah, and clearly there's a lot of like connection points here with real life or not climbing life. Is that in a lot of situations you can feel overwhelmed as a person, and breaking down this big goal in smaller chunks that just show progress and celebrate progress is a real good process to get through it.
And how did you find your emotions changing on the way? Did they cycle quickly on the path about this exertion, small goals, moving on, or were they large changes in emotions that took days to cycle? What was, you're going through this really hard pace, the realizations kicking in, what was it like from a mental health perspective and the ability to cope?
You stay super focused. I was able to create like a very intentional focus in myself for especially, I would say, the last 3-4 weeks of the expedition. And that focus and intention, or that it was so much that when I was off the mountain, I could not sleep for a week, weirdly enough, because it was very hard for me to get rid of it. You really put yourself in a mindset where you really want to like get very intentional about everything you do and really focused and really don't get distracted. The two things that I feel were really important for helping me in keeping this mental resilience and is one I mentioned already, is positive thinking. You really cannot create any self-doubt. Self-doubt is just not helpful. You have to trust your training, your experience, and even if you're overestimated, it's better to overestimate it in an intentional way than having any self-doubt. There are these moments where it's really sketchy, and like we had to cross like some of the glacier chasms that were like 3-4 ladders like taped against each other. And you have to walk over them. And it's technically not hard. It's really not super hard to do. But if you are on a ladder that is like bouncing and shaking and you look down and there is like, 500 meters of nothing or 400 meters of nothing, then you have to really not get it into your head. And you have to trust that you can just keep going and stay in that, and keep your focus walking over it. The second that helped me is visualization. In my job at Microsoft, I've done a lot of like large presentations and large scale presentation announcements. And I always use visualization in those moments because it just helps you to prepare for what's coming. It felt that like visualization was also a great technique for climbing Mount Everest because visualizing the night before when you're in your sleeping bag, like, hey, I'm going to cross those ladders. Like, how I'm going to approach this. There will be this vertical wall that I have to climb through. Like, how will I do it? What will be my first steps? That really helps you to be more confident in the moment that you reach the blocker or the objective.
Very good. So we'll come on to what it's like to actually reach the summit in a second. But I think as we've gone on that journey and just had a sense of what it was like for you, I think you've covered 5 or 6 pretty important self-management and change management pieces of advice. So it seems to me that knowing your team around you, the importance of teamwork and the importance of aligned purpose really struck me on that. Staying calm and focused under pressure, which, we all have on a day-to-day basis. I think it's put into sharp focus when you're on a bouncing ladder, 500 meters above a plunging chasm. Wherein the third element of staying calm and focused under pressure and actually understanding what pressure means to you, how you're managing that and how you're staying positive in those sort of situations and what you need to do to prepare. The act of climbing Everest itself provides a great analogy for the sorts of things that we do because it naturally breaks up into sort of day-long chunks and taking each day as you go along. And then finally, being very, very conscious of mental health and resilience, trusting your training, not letting self-doubt creep in as you're going along. Seems to me there's many lessons in life that can be applied to the sort of challenges we deal with on a daily basis, Erwin.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to add on and the great points that you make here, Dave, is that I mentioned it, but I think it's such an important point, is the focus on what you control. There's a lot when you, first of all, I will be to get to the summit of Everest, clearly it requires training and preparation, but you also have to be lucky. You really, you have to have luck on your side. There are elements that you don't control, and you have to be lucky that they're not going south at the wrong moment during the climb. One, of course, is weather. And we were really lucky with the weather, especially on our summit day. But secondly, is that when you go through the icefall, there is a lot of objective dangers, variables that you don't control. Ice towers can collapse, avalanches. You walk in a very high risk point for avalanches because you kind of walk in a valley between. On one side, Nuptse, and on the other side, Everest. And so if you start getting too focused on the things around you that you don't control, you can really get distracted and you lose your energy. Maybe you lose your focus. And so staying focused on the things you control and what you can do to be safe and just ignore everything around you. And it's probably not a thing I would say normally too much, but it's a kind of a self-defense mechanism. But it also, by focusing on your control, and I read some books about this and studies, is that people that focus on their control are also coming faster into action, have a higher impact, and also a higher ability to set priorities.
You're almost wasting energy thinking about things that will have no tangible outcome for you as the individual whilst you're doing this trip. So you've got to use all the capacity you've got at the task at hand, because the task at hand is so incredible that what you're undertaking, you can't waste any time thinking about things that you just can't affect. And I think a lot of people get consumed by that in life generally, don't they? And it's a bit more about the fortitude to focus on the here and now and do what you need to do to get to the next step than it is about worrying about what might be round the corner or things you can't control, like you say, the weather. If the weather goes wrong, there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, there's a Dutch expression about it, which I never found a real great English translation, but it says that people suffer more from their fears than from the things that happened in their lives. It says you're suffering by your fears versus what really the consequences could be. It's not helpful. Clearly, it's not helpful. It's not. It's wasted energy, as you said, Rob.
Indeed. And maybe just to bring our conversation about what it's like tackling big challenges and going through the process, or the emotional process, the physical rigor, as well as all of the associated practical and professional rigor that comes with that. Maybe just tell us what it was like the morning of actually achieving the goal, Erwin. So what happened on that day? I know you have to, don't you leave the last base camp at 3 a.m. or something along those lines?
Yeah. So on the summer day, we spent 2 nights, just to paint a little bit the picture here. We spent 2 nights in Camp 4. And Camp 4 is at 8,000 meters. And for Americans, it's like, 26,000 feet? I think so, yeah. And so being in Camp 4 feels like being on the moon. If you see the pictures, it looks like a beautiful spot with great views, but that is not how you experience it as a climber. It is windy, it's cold. And one of the things that was totally new for me is like climbing with supplemental oxygen. And although we were pretty well acclimatized, when you hit Camp 4, you have a dependency to supplemental oxygen. And you will take your mask off for eating and drinking. But you typically will not do it then more than 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then you're very happy to get your oxygen mask on because you start to feel a little bit lightheaded. And so there's this thing that you kind of live with an oxygen bottle. You sleep with an oxygen bottle, you hike with an oxygen bottle, you go to the restroom with an oxygen bottle. So you have this dependency on this oxygen. And it really felt like a weird environment, Camp 4. Almost nobody comes out of their tent. And you really are sleeping in a tent in a very hostile environment with your buddy. And we were almost like lying in a sleeping bag for 2 days before the climb started.
I'm sure anybody who's done a big release of any system wouldn't recognize that kind of analogy for the night before go live, Erwin.
Yes. And so you wake up in the morning I think we woke up at 11 p.m., if I remember correctly. We left camp at 1 a.m. And it's getting out of the tent and getting ready was like, I felt, I wouldn't say pretty close, but it became very tempting to go back into my tent in camp on the morning of our summit climb because it was windy, it was snowing. I couldn't find my crampons because I left them outside the tent, and it was some fresh snow was falling. So I had to start digging in to find my crampons as well as my ice axe. And then I had my big gloves on, and I wasn't able to get my crampons on with my big gloves. So at one moment I was like, okay, I need to get them on. So I pulled them off. I had like thin liners under it, but immediately you feel your fingers starting to freeze. And then everybody around you is moving and shouting and making noises. And I felt that I was totally blowing it at that moment. And when I finally was on my route to the summit, you're aligned with a Sherpa on your summit climb. So you have a dedicated Sherpa who was amazing, by the way. And his name is Mingmar. I would never have made it to the summit without Mingmar. But he is kind of like the person that stays with you. And he was really hurrying me. He was like, and so I had the feeling that I was the last one coming out of camp. And then you get your voice in your head is like, oh man, if I'm not hitting certain milestones at certain time slots, maybe the guides will call me back. And then I went through like 7 weeks of suffering for nothing because you're getting so close at that moment. And so I was trying to really push myself. And then finally, when on the day of the summit, and it's approximately 8 hours from Camp 4 to the summit, but halfway is one of the moments that you can take a rest and you can take your backpack off. The rest of the summit climb is kind of too steep to really take your backpack off, and so that point is called the balcony. It's a famous moment where everybody takes a break. And so, and I hit the balcony almost at the same time when it became light. And then I realized that there was only like one climber in front of me. The rest was all behind me. And I was like pushing myself and trying to race, and was stressed without any reason because everybody, even all the guides, were behind me. And so I took a very long break on the balcony. And that was kind of the first moment I started to really internalize what I was doing. Because the first 4 hours I was totally in myself and trying to push myself as hard as possible. And then the light comes through, and it's this weird emotion that you really get the feeling that you do something very special at that moment. Yeah, because you look around you and you see other 8,000 meter peaks like Lhotse and Makalu, like you kind of are getting above of them, and you have an amazing view. But then you also, in front of you, see the South Ridge going to the South Summit, and then where it really gets steep and sketchy. And so you also feel this like thing in your stomach is like, okay, now it becomes real. And also I really understood, because I read books and I talked to a lot of people, that this is the part where any accident can be fatal. This is where this area, they call it the dead zone. And unfortunately, and one of the traumatic experiences of Everest is that you see dead bodies.
I was about to say, isn't there frozen bodies of previous climbers that have tried to go on this route and not made it?
Yes, exactly. And so this is the area where you're very conscious about, like, hey, even a small accident, and small accident would be like you make a fall, you're on fixed rope. And so when you fall, you will not fall into the valley, and you fall maybe a few feet or a few meters, but you'll be held by the rope, hopefully. But you can still injure yourself significantly. But this is an area where even breaking an ankle is like a life-threatening injury. Right. Because the one thing that I didn't realize is that at that altitude, like, everybody is at his max. There is no slack with Sherpas, not really with yourself or Western guides. And so there is this, I think climbers could get the normalcy bias, where because you are around other people, is that it feels maybe less risky as it is.
The other aspect from what I've seen on documentaries of Everest in particular, there's like a line of people that are waiting to summit. And I think normalcy bias is a great phrase for that particular situation, because actually almost at its most dangerous, you get a sense that you're in a queue of people waiting, and you have to keep your wits about you, presumably.
Yeah, 100%. And so I saw also some of the climbers in my team that were it just felt that they didn't realize how dangerous it was what we were doing, and how risky it is just to be on that altitude. And that if something happens to you, there's no cavalry. Like, if you are not able to get yourself down yourself, and so you're not able to walk yourself down, and certainly if you're like a larger or heavier person, it takes like 4 to 8 people to get one person down at that altitude.
How much contingency have you got on the oxygen when you're up? So you get to this Camp 4, you say the oxygen timer starts ticking. Yeah. You can't do without it. Like, a real resource is burning down in the background as you're going up. What's the leeway on the amount of oxygen you've got?
Yeah, you have a little bit leeway, but it's you're not able. This is something that I also didn't understand. I learned a lot from that, is that you also have to plan where you put your bottles. So it's not possible. And so you have technically 4 oxygen bottles for our climb. We had 4 bottles. Yeah. But you cannot bring 4 bottles to the summit. So they get stashed at certain points. So you really have to plan just to be back at one of those milestone points in time to refresh your oxygen. And it's a great point because we hit the summit, and it was like we had such a luck with our day. It was a beautiful day. There was almost no wind. So we were sitting on the summit for almost an hour and a half. And I didn't realize it, but Mingmar, my Sherpa, became very nervous. And he was hurrying me. And I had in my head like, hey, I'm only on my 2nd bottle of oxygen. I'm on the summit. We have this beautiful weather. There's no rush. Like, we can take the whole day to get down in Camp 4. And it was still, I would say, late morning at that moment. And then I realized that my next oxygen bottle was stashed on the balcony. So although I had technically enough bottles, I had not any bottles close by. So it meant at the end that I had to rush myself down to the balcony, and I was there in time. But it was more stress than I was hoping for at that moment.
Just before we finish, tell us a little bit about, before you got on to realizing you'd nearly run out of oxygen on the top, which doesn't sound great. But what was that feeling of accomplishment like? And What was your view like on that day?
I was not really able to internalize it at that moment, I think. I was, that internalization probably came later. And because, again, I was very focused, very tense is maybe a different way to say it, but I was not confused that being on the summit is a final achievement. I was concerned about getting myself down to Camp 4 and then getting back to base camp. I knew that this was literally halfway, and I had that pretty clearly painted in my mind. In hindsight, to be honest, I wish that I was a little bit more in the moment on the summit as well as the summit climb. Because one of the things that I realized later is that I almost made no pictures. I was so focused on going up and down that I didn't even stop to make pictures. And I was very lucky that, again, Mingmar had a camera and he made a number of pictures of me. That's kind of the memories that I have of that day. Because for myself, it didn't stop or come into my, I didn't really realize that this was a one-time moment and a one-time experience.
So, Erwin, I suppose when you're young, you don't think, I'm off to climb Everest. It's not the sort of thing that occurs to you, but over your life, it sounds like you got to a position where it became something that you wanted to do through shared experience, growing through talking and working with others in the mountaineering arena. Can you just track your journey to getting to the decision to say, I'm going to do this? Because it's something you have to train so hard for and it takes so much effort. What led you to that decision that said, I'm going to do this?
So the thing is that for me, although I always was fascinated by Everest as a child, I read books, I watched movies. This was never really something that was in my to-do list till maybe 2-3 years ago, and where I really start to consider it. And then I think two things were important here. And one is that I would even say that if you would have asked me 10 years ago, do you want to climb Everest? I would have probably laughed in your face. And I was lucky that I met people in the last years in the Seattle area where I live. That one is an experienced mountain guide who has climbed Everest now 13 times, who became a friend, and a few other people that really helped me to understand what it takes to do an adventure like this or an expedition, but also the steps in preparation that you needed to get there. And I think this is such an important point, because you can't achieve in life what you can't see. And I think it's very true for people that grow up in maybe less privileged environments, is that if you don't have a role model that shows you the path or shows you the way, it's very hard to get there, because you don't even know the first step to take. And I think that I was really lucky with getting people in my life that showed how I could get there. And that gave me the confidence that this is an adventure I could take on. Because climbing Everest was not like the most evident thing for me to do in life. Like I had cancer twice. My hips are completely wear and teared. I've done now one hip operation. I'm waiting for the second hip operation. I have some ingestions issues that I need prescriptions for every single day. So it's clearly I'm not and I'm also like an older person. So it's not like the most typical thing I would think about. The fact that I had these examples, it really gave me this. It helped me ask this question, like, why not me? And why could I not do something like this? And that gave me this energy, like, hey, I can do something that I never thought I would be able to do before. And now I'm gonna focus. I'm gonna train. I'm gonna really prepare myself to get there and make this like a goal for a certain time in my life. It's probably one of the things I'm trying to also teach my children is you use mentors and coaches in your life. And don't try to do everything by yourself, but there is such a value of mentors, coaches, and other people that can help you understand the steps or maybe can help open doors for you that would be closed if you don't leverage people around you.
Sjouk, What have you been looking at this week?
So each week I do some research on related ideas in transformation and tech, and this week I thought we should take a look at why you should organize your change initiatives around purpose and benefits. So if there's one thing that's certain about the future, it's that change is here to stay. The ability to constantly transform has become a top priority for many organizations. And this makes change management an essential business priority now. However, the failure rates of change products remain high, with only 31% considered successful. So to address this, change management needs to be approached in a different way with a focus on purpose and benefits. So projects that are linked to a higher purpose have a higher chance of success, and the benefits should be identified and mapped out for each key stakeholder early in the transformation. And by adopting new concepts like purpose and benefits, organizations can create value much faster and more easily develop change and project management competencies. So a question: do you think aligning change management to purpose and benefits will increase success?
I'll have a first go at that. Certainly benefits, I think, speak for themselves, and they should be tracked, they should be rigorous, and you should be able to account for the money and time spent in terms of deliverable, whether that be return on investment or whether that be delivered product or function point or whatever it might be. So benefits, I think, to me is an obvious one. Purpose, however, I think map very clearly to that conversation and that analogy, because in my mind, a lot of people forget that in a rush to create business case, which is a benefit. They forget the important aspect of, well, why we're doing this thing in the first place. I mean, Erwin, as we discussed in the conversation, it seemed like, the purpose for what you guys were doing was maybe blindingly obvious because you were trying to get to the top. But was there other elements of purpose going on in that adventure for you?
I think the climbing Everest is a pretty egoistic thing to do. If you think about it's a self-fulfilling thing.
Yeah.
And clearly, you could make the argument that you help the local economy and you help the local people, and that's absolutely true because there's a lot of people in Nepal that live from Everest climbs, and so there's a lot of contribution that you make. But at the end, it's the purpose for me was, I think, and this, by the way, this is one of the hardest questions to answer. And the hardest question for me to answer is why did you do it?
Right. It seems like one of the obvious ones to ask, but one of the hardest ones to answer.
It's one of the obvious to ask yourself, but it's very hard because it's really a combination of one is it's a beautiful adventure. And there are a lot of aspects around it. That's a beautiful adventure that you just want to experience. I also think there is an element of proving yourself to yourself about creating a relatively absurd goal and seeing if you can make it and getting yourself in that situation. And and probably the underlying reason that you want to do that for yourself is probably maybe partly uncertainties, maybe partly imposter syndrome. I think there's all kind of complexity of elements as a human that you want to prove to yourself that you would be capable of doing something.
Did you find, though, that those thoughts sustained you in the difficult moments? So, for example, in terms of Sjoukje's question around, is purpose something viable that's going to accelerate or drive your change more successfully? In that case, it unifies a team, shows a direction, actually gives you a higher reason for do something than just purely the underlying financial, which some people find very motivating, but other people sort of more struggle with from a motivational perspective. Did you find that some of those elements that you just described sustained you on the journey and kept you focused?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the elements of purpose for me was that also showing and maybe most important for me was my children. But I think I got feedback from a lot of people around me saying that it was demonstrating that with focus and effort, human beings can reach a lot. And so I wanted to, the purpose for me was and that was one of my motivations, to be honest, to keep going and make it to the summit. Because I really wanted to show my children also is that, hey, your old man can, with the right investment in time and with resilience, can do something special. So never hold yourself back in life. Never think that there are things that you cannot do or cannot achieve.
Rob, didn't you say that that's what you said to your kids just before you started Red Dead Redemption 2?
Yes, David. Set the goals appropriately. However, what you have just said reminds me of the famous JFK quote, "We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard." And it's about that right stuff, isn't it? You've got the right stuff to do it, but you also need the preparation to be able to be ready to be able to do it as well. So resonates a lot with me, what you just said.
Quite so. Well, look, Erwin, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I mean, a massively inspirational story, not only in terms of what you achieved, but also in terms of some of those underlying reasons for doing it. And hopefully everyone's taking away from it not only a great story, but actually there's just so much about human resilience and taking on large tasks and working your way through something and having a clear direction that can be applied to business life and the sort of challenges that we have in the ever-changing world in which we practice.
Awesome.
So thank you again for your time. It's been brilliant talking to you. A real privilege.
Awesome. Hey, it was very happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
So we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guest what they're excited about doing next, and that could be
climbing Everest again,
another mountain, bigger one,
K2 maybe next time. Yeah.
Or it could be something you're doing in your professional life. So, Erwin, what are you excited about doing next?
Yeah, I'm a positive person that always finds exciting things to do in my life. There's two things I'm excited now to. So we're in the process of moving to Tampa. So I'm excited to start a life here with my family, and so total new environment. So we'll absolutely things that we need to figure out here, but it will be a great opportunity and a lot of fun. And secondly, I also started a new role in Microsoft recently that also has like a significant amount of challenges and opportunities. So two things that I'm really excited about and looking forward to.
Fantastic. Well, look, we wish you all the very best with both of those upcoming new challenges. And Sjoukje has also just moved house recently, and that felt like Everest, didn't it, Sjouk?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it was not Tampa, but Lisse, but it did. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, let's hope it goes more straightforwardly for you, Erwin.
Yeah. Well, by the way, Dave, if you would have asked me this question yesterday, I would have said I'm also very excited about the new football season. But the Seahawks lost terribly last night. So I'm...
You've got dimmed enthusiasm now.
Yes. It's not top of my mind at this moment about things to be excited about.
So a huge thanks to our guest this week. Erwin, thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks also to our sound and editing wizards Ben and Louis, our distracted producer Marcel, and of course to all of our listeners. We're on LinkedIn and X, Dave Chapman, Rob Kernahan and Sjoukje Zaal. Feel free to follow or connect with us, and please get in touch if you have any comments or ideas for the show. And of course, if you haven't already done that, rate and subscribe to our podcast. See you in another reality next week.